Hallo, nehmen Sie Platz, bitte, dass wir loslegen können gleich. Willkommen zur letzten Vorlesung hier im Rahmen unserer Einführung in die Informatik. Ich habe Ihnen versprochen, dass wir eine Riesenüberraschung heute haben. Ich habe ja schon so ein bisschen verraten, was die Überraschung sein wird. Und dann haben Sie ja geschrieben im Chat irgendwo, jetzt müsst ihr aber auch delivern. Und wir werden delivern. More precisely, it's not going to be me he will be delivering, but it's Antoine, good friend and colleague, who is the managing director of the Venture Lab Software and AI here at the Technical University of Munich. So there's different strategic parts of the mission that TUM is pursuing. There's of course research, there's of course education, there's of course innovation, but then there's something on top of that, and that is entrepreneurship. And you may know that TUM is extremely successful in building the grounds for extremely successful companies. We have Unternehmertum, we have CDTM, Center for Digital Technology and Management, and we have a few other things that have been extremely good at helping set up these companies. And now the next part of this is the venture labs here that we have at TUM, which essentially is the idea to try to streamline organizational measures for even having more success in founding companies. And there's about 10 or so of these venture labs. One is software and AI. And guess what? Antoine is, as I've said before, responsible for software and AI. And what I thought would be interesting for everybody here is to see, hey, what is TUM doing in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of these venture labs, specifically in the context of software and AI. And that is why I thought it's a good idea to invite Antoine here and talk about the work that they have been doing and the first successes that they have been happy to achieve. So we'll have a slightly different format of the session today. Antoine will speak for 40 or 45 minutes. And I'd ask you to refrain from questions during his class. You can, of course, ask questions with our tweetback tool that we're going to collect, but we'll have a Q&A session in the end. Okay, so no questions in between, which is different from what we usually do. But at the end, there's ample time for many questions. Good. Antoine, he's going to say a few words about himself in a second, so I don't need to introduce him even more. Great pleasure to have you here. Thanks very much for being with us.
Alexander, thank you. My Deutsch is ganz schrecklich, but I could understand that he said that I was a surprise, and I don't remember when it was the last time that I was introduced as a surprise guest. So this is probably a good sign. Alexander is among the people, the very small number of people that I discussed when I was discussing with TUM to come and be on the Venture Lab. So I have to say that I thank you for having convinced me, because it's a great position. But I also explained to him that if I were in your shoes and he would have to grade my work, he would have to create, a sort of specific category of grades, not F, but F minus, or G or H, which is basically my level of technical ability these days. And I'm pretty impressed, because I met many of you at the bachelor, the master's, at PhD level, and I'm so impressed with all of you. I keep wondering more or less every week what my startup would have been if I had been in your situation, with all the technical talent and all the resources which are existing today. And this is what I'd like to be sharing with you, in a way, what is entrepreneurship and what it should mean for you. Let me say a few more words about the Venture Labs. So how many of you have heard of the Venture Labs? Okay, so we are not doing a good job. So you may know that 2 years ago, there was $1.3 billion of venture capital that was given to ventures in Munich. By comparison, the same year, Berlin got 3. And places like, Silicon Valley, London, whatever you want, got maybe double digit. And there's no reason for this to be the case, because there are a lot of capabilities in terms of ecosystem, in terms of talent, in terms of universities, in terms of venture capital to be able to achieve this. And this is the idea that the university has been having, which is to try to get a sense for how to take all the resources which exist in between the various organizations, but try to do something which would get some more work done in translating some of the ideas into ventures. So, a number of guys, including Alexander, sat down, think about a number of ideas and verticals which could be interesting to be able to foster new ventures. And these are all the different verticals which have been object of a venture lab. So software and AI, this is where I am, but there's also some colleagues in quantum computing. There's a huge amount of work which is right now happening, which is unbelievably fascinating in quantum computing. Robotics AI, in Weinstefan, there's something like 15 guys working on an unbelievable product for next food type of ventures. My colleague Johannes has been working on unbelievable things with guys that want to apply either medtech or new drugs. He's doing fabulous work. Sarah Gessel is on the other side, working on new development, new things on battery. We have one person who's been joining recently who come from Singapore, who is going to be looking at all the aerospace startup. And basically all of us, we don't necessarily come from a sort of typical university environment. I'll explain a little later, but we all have practical experience, and we all trying to make sure that we could see beyond the technology, beyond the courses and so on, what is needed to get all of these venture working. Okay, so this is what is the venture lab. Basically, I never want to go into the details of the organization, the programs. We are basically at your disposal. Okay, if you have ideas, if you want to discuss, if you want to get any idea that you have to start a venture, regardless of whether you are a postdoc, PhD, or you're just starting, we love to talk to you guys. Okay, starting a business, it start very early, and we have this sort of practical experience on what this is, and we are basically here to help and to see how we could be helping. There are a number of programs, there are a number of resources, there are many things, but come and visit us. If you have a little itch that you want to do something, come and see us. We'd be very happy. So a few words about me. So I remember the first time that I discussed with Alexander, I told him I'm totally the wrong person. I'm Swiss, I'm not German. My Deutsch is ganz schrecklich. I am not from TUM. I am actually a French engineer. And then I did an MBA at Harvard Business School. I think that's when someone arrived, I think someone has a Harvard t-shirt. Yeah, he's shy, but he has a Harvard t-shirt. So someone knows about Harvard. And what I did for the last 13 years is that I run a software company called GSX, which was where I did an exit a couple of years ago. And the VC that was with me, he was not unhappy because he did an 8-time exit. And in my spare time, I was busy working with students. There is an equivalent of TUM in Lausanne, which is the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. So I was among the mentor of the Master of Entrepreneurship, and I've worked with a number of guys like you, or established guys which have already started their companies. And this is what I've been doing. I've also done things at a number of incubators. And working with dynamic guys and dynamic entrepreneurs is really great. And right now I'm working with probably something like more than 50 teams. In fact, we have in the venture lab a system where we have a number of guys applying. In software AI, there are 93 registered teams who want to do something about ventures, which they identify to be related to software and AI. And if you take into account many of the, say, medtech, which define themselves not necessarily as software AI, but more like healthcare or other type of ventures, that tells you the amount of work which is right now happening. And this is why I'm working with an unbelievable amount of interesting organization. The positive thing, and I will speak about this a little later, is that this has allowed me to better understand what you are being taught, how you approach venture. And I've discussed this thing regularly with Alexander, because I think this is really important that we try to compare notes. And this is why we thought that it was important to actually try to step back and give a sense for how we could be helping you thinking about venture. So this is what I'm going to be doing. And finally, one thing that I want to say is that this is a great place. You know, I've been to, I've studied Imperial College, I've studied to Centrale Supélec in France, in Harvard. I've been mentoring in places like PFL, and you may not be aware of it, but you're in a fabulous place. Again, another thing that I remember thinking is that I've met a number of you guys, and I cannot think, but if I had been in front of you guys, and if I could be have hired some of you in my former company, we would have been far, far better. So I'm basically really enjoying this, and I hope that I can, you know, share a bit of this enthusiasm with all of you guys. So I'd like to discuss about 3 points. The first one, which is something that is probably important, is that there is an idea about what is research, about what's innovation, and what's entrepreneurship. So I just want to start and lay a bit the foundation, tell you what is really entrepreneurship. So of course, I'll start by what is not entrepreneurship. One of the things that we've discussed, Alexander and I, very often is the fact that you guys, you know, you have got many, many choices in your career. So I want to be able to address what are the plus and minuses, what is the specificity of being, you know, of being entrepreneur rather than going into McKinsey, BCG, a big consulting firm, whatever, and so on. I think this is really important. And then I'd like to describe resources which are available and a few next steps for you guys, and then take questions. Okay? And by the way, software, do you know who wrote "Software is Eating the World"? Have you ever heard of this this tagline, "Software is eating the world"? Guys, you should know it's even more important than technology. Have you heard of a guy named Marc Andreessen? Okay, okay. You know what? There's a special category. They got an H for this. Okay, Marc Andreessen is a guy who now is a venture capitalist at A16Z. But before that, he was the founder of a company called Netscape. Do you know what Netscape is? Yes, someone. So yes, Netscape is the company that created the first browser for the World Wide Web. It was called Mosaic. It was terrible, it was clunky, but this became something that started all the, you know, it's probably as more important in terms of creating the internet as we knew it as what Tim Berners-Lee has been doing. And Netscape also was the first company which got, you know, public very early on. And I remember the day Netscape had its introduction, you know, in the stock market, its IPO. And this was a crazy, crazy day, because suddenly a lot of people were saying that all what this work, which was done at university, could suddenly translate into huge amount of, you know, business with huge amount of success. So now he's a very successful VC at A16Z. And if you can catch him, he also speaks at Y Combinator. So he's got unbelievable things to explain. And Software is Eating the World is probably explain why there are more than 90 companies which are already in the venture lab reference in the software and AI. That's because the huge amount of things to do. Now, one of the things that I explained to when I arrived and discussed with many of you, Alexander, and other people, is that at the university, a lot of the students, a lot of the academics, not Alexander, a lot of the people in the faculty believe that if you are doing research, if you are doing some work in a lab, it's basically like being an entrepreneur. Okay, and I think this is very important to do, but entrepreneurship is very different. So usually what I like to do is that I like to step back and say that we have to make the distinction between 3 things: research, innovation, entrepreneurship. So research is basically, you know, doing some work, trying to get some problem and saying, how can we improve something, okay? There is a presentation that I've done for the IDEO World keynote where I spoke about a team that worked on barcode scanner, Bluetooth barcode scanner. And to do this, they actually did some work to make Bluetooth, which is a consumer-oriented protocol, something which could be industrial grade. So they did some research, and then they think how they could try to actually use this research, so advancement of state of the art, in something which would be of value. And then they decided to do this on barcode scanner. And what was very interesting is that the way that they did some great engineering work, but what they found is that when they wanted to convince people, they just wanted to demonstrate the product was actually working. Some guys saw this and say, oh, hold on, this could be of value for me, okay? Because if I have a product that is doing this sort of thing, this is the value that I can get. So usually when people talk about innovation, they are saying this new work which has been done has value. And I want to insist on this because once again, you can do some research, but the people that will tell you this is valuable, this is not the same type of people, okay? You know the story about do you know about the Xerox Sparks? Have you heard of the Xerox Sparks? So yes, someone has heard of it. The mouse. Okay, thank you. So, as your colleague has said, this is the famous place where Xerox asked a number of researchers to do some core ground type of work on innovative technology. And this was at the, it was what, the 60s? So it was in the 60s. You were not born. I wasn't either. And Steve Jobs visited the Xerox box. It was after he had started Apple. And he saw guys that were working on workstation, which were connected via Ethernet cables, which had graphical user interface, which were of course very clunky. And they addressed this, and they could access these resources not by command line, but with a mouse. And what is very interesting is that Steve Jobs went to Xerox and he negotiated the IP rights to Xerox because the guy from Xerox said, this work has no value for us. So you have, in other words, what you have is that you got some of the most innovative and groundbreaking work which has been done by unbelievable people. You have an unbelievably successful company, which is Xerox at the time, which was the leader in copier and one of the most admired blue chip company in the US. They invest in research and they can't see the innovation, okay? So this is a typical example of what happens, that some guys do some research, but the people that actually find these to be successful are other people. While we are there are a number of other examples. And one of the most famous example I know of is actually Einstein equation of relativity. This is not complex mathematics. The most of these equations were actually found by many physicians. What made that Einstein made this was still the innovation is that he said, no, hold on. These are not mathematical aberration. There is a maximum speed of the light. So this is why, again, some people will actually do the research, but there will be other people which will see the value. And if you go to this video, which is on the YouTube channel of Entrepreneurship, where I explain the example of the barcode scanners, you will see that a lot of the work which I did coming later was not on the work to create the product, but to be able to see where was the value. And then what is entrepreneurship? It's basically saying, okay, this is of value for a certain number of people. How can we make a business of it? So it's very important because, once again, we are in university like researchers. I hope no one is recording this. I know they are. There's a lot of marvelous research which is being done, but the research is not necessarily done to produce academic papers. The research should be able to actually produce some things which could be innovation. And innovation being actually getting out of the lab and trying to show what you are doing, what is being done, and having people say, this is why this is valuable. And then entrepreneurship is saying, hold on, this thing is valuable for one guy, it could be valuable for other people, and maybe we can make a business out of it. This is entrepreneurship, okay? So not research for research's sake, it's being able to create something which is of value so that you can make a business out of it. Now, I told you I'm from the Harvard Business School, and the guy who is one of the big guru about entrepreneurship is a guy named Bill Salman. I'll mention later, but the Venture Lab have a podcast. I don't know if you are aware the Venture Lab have a podcast. Is anyone aware that we have a podcast? So I'm really not doing good work about communicating. I'm glad I'm talking in front of you guys. And the guy who founded the entrepreneurship studies has written quite a lot of books which are really very important. And his definition of entrepreneurship is the following. It's basically forming and testing hypotheses to try to find out if you got something that can be done differently, and that you go out and you try to get a sense for, is this working? Okay, is there value? Can I make modification in what I'm doing or proposing, until I have something which basically means that people are ready to actually see the value, transform the value into a number of monetary flow, and I can make a business out of it. So this entrepreneurial attitude is to say, okay, I found some research, I can do something differently. I think some guys will be seeing there's value. And then I try to go and say, so is this good enough? Can we do something differently? Are you ready to pay for this? If I add this thing, is this okay? And then you do this until you have something which is something where you have a company that can sustain. So this is entrepreneurship, okay? And usually one of the characters of entrepreneurship is that you got nearly zero resources and it's unbelievably uncertain, okay? You have zero resources. Most of the entrepreneurs are always going to be looking for how to get more funding, how to get more resources to help them. But via this sort of attitude, a lot of startups are created, a lot of companies get launched, and a lot of value is being created. So this is what entrepreneurship. So once again, I want to repeat, it's doing something, it's not doing research for research. It's doing something which is to say, this is a little different. I can make a number of reasons why this would be a value for a number of people, and I can actually make of it a business. Let me give you an example. So I have a son who is just like you. He's finishing his studies in Geneva. And 2 years ago, when this was the summer, he hates when I'm using these examples, so I keep using these. Two years ago during the summer, he could not do a summer job. And with a couple of friends, they say, why don't we start a company? So they basically started and saying, we don't like the cookies that you can buy in Switzerland. By the way, that's true. They are crunchy. They are not really very nice and so on. And basically they say, we can probably do better cookies and we can make a business out of it. So what did they do? They actually started, unconsciously to act like entrepreneurs. They made what I would call a lot of hypotheses to be able to say, we can do something differently and it can translate into a business. So the first thing that they did is they say, how can we manage to actually bake enough cookies, have got the same recipe, make something which is better? They, of course, tested the cookies on me, which is a great position to be in until I said it's really good. And then they say, okay, we want to bake on Saturday, we want to deliver on bicycle on Sunday, and I finish at Sunday, 12 o'clock. So when you translate these things, it's a lot of small hypotheses that you need to be doing. So it's basically, is this the right process? Do we have the right type of food? Can we bake enough of them? Can we create enough demand generation? Do we price okay? Can we, with 3 guys, cover the whole of Geneva and so on? So every time they modify a number of these things, and until they arrive to a situation where they found how to buy supply, not a supermarket, but a wholesaler, to lower the cost, find the right amount of demand generation, price at the level where they could be actually making some money, understand how to do the delivery by looking at how was being able to actually work out some type of system for the delivery, for the effective delivery. They even were in a situation where they were quote unquote too successful for the capacity, and one of them had the idea of calling their former school and ask if they could use the Mensa on Saturday because no one was using this, and get more capacity. So there's not a lot of technology in itself. There's no huge amount of research. It's not BioNTech number 2. But what you have is a group of guys which, without being specialists neither about delivery, about a website, about anything else, just say there's something that we can do differently. Okay. And then it's doing all these various steps until you're at a situation whereby every weekend, even by giving out 10% of the net profit to a charity, which they did, they could make every weekend 3 of them 1,500 of net operating margin. But of course, they didn't do this. This didn't happen the first week. They had to try all of these things. Well, it's exactly the same thing when you are doing a startup, I would say, in software. I'd like to make the distinction between some of the startups which are not for software. If you are, for instance, in healthcare, this is something which I've discussed many times with my colleagues who looked after healthcare. The way you actually push a certain molecule is that you do a number of research to do clinical studies and validation. So the fact is that if you have the ability to take a drug and it meets all the various type of certification and clinical studies, you more or less, that if you go through all of them, you have a success, okay? If the disease is COVID, you've got a big success. If this is something which is a very specialized disease, you got a small success, okay? But in software, and in a way like this one as well, what you have to do to be able to actually make a success out of an idea is to say, well, I believe we can do something differently, but I'm not sure, okay? And there are many examples here or at TUM of guys saying, look, we probably can do something differently. Have you heard of a company called Shopify? Okay, so these guys, they've done a better job of getting their word out because you've heard more of Shopify than the Venture Lab. Do you know how Shopify? So Shopify is basically a company that has developed a WYSIWYG system to enable merchant brands to actually develop their own merchant site. Okay, it's a Canadian company. It's multi-billion. This is very impressive. They also came at a time when everyone thought that all the e-commerce was on the hands of Amazon. No one could come and do anything. Do you know the way how they started? So initially, the guy wanted to sell some snowboarding equipment on the web. So they started doing this. Then they found that they couldn't find the tool that they needed to find. So they asked a few teams to actually develop a system that they could use for their own use. So like many guys, they start doing something. They're probably being bootstrapped and so on. Then they go and see a VC, venture capitalist, and the venture capitalist look at the snowboarding and he says, look, this is interesting, but this stuff, you know what? That's more interesting. I'm ready to give you some money if you just focus on this one. So in a way, think of these. This is of course an extreme case, but these are guys you would have asked them at the beginning what they want to do. They will say, well, we want to sell some snowboarding equipment on the web because no one is doing this and so on. What they do is that they start getting this feedback, and then they change. So many of the approaches and the entrepreneurial approaches is testing a number of things, getting the feedback, and it is listening to the feedback. Among the team that I work with, there's a guy that I work who is a professional football player and TUM alumni. He's got a team. He's got a company he started called Real Stars, and Real Stars uses artificial intelligence to give feedback to the football players, and they analyze the movement. They have developed model for the 25 typical type of drills you have in football. And what he did is that he actually wanted to work with a number of coaches. So he created a very quick application. By the way, the application is great. If you like to play football, it's really great. When he came in to work with me, of course, he came with a football, and I spent 30 minutes realizing how bad I was playing, but I really loved it. And very interestingly, so he started doing a first mock-up. He creates on Instagram a page and he asks, are you interested? Out of the 5,000 email download he gets, 10 people are coaches, not of the League A coach, but mid-sized type of teams and so on. So he reaches out to them and he says, can you tell me what you would want to see? Can I develop something with your help? And this is how we develop his platform. Now they do this. They are very happy to work with him. And one day, a couple of them come and they say, you know what? By the way, this glitzy artificial intelligence stuff is very cool, but we are still preparing all the practice for our players using pencil and paper. So he listens to that. And they say, oh, really? Well, I can help you on this as well. And they say, oh, this is very interesting. So he's going to be on TV. He's discussing with a number of VCs. But what you see is that the guy is saying, maybe I can help the guys do something. And he's cooperating with them to modify this. And he's also trying to say, what do you need? This is the entrepreneurial approach. No research would have been saying that actually the way you get some applications to be used, some apps to be used for something like football is going to be helping the coach get away with pencil and paper. So this is why this sort of back and forth, listening, modifying, testing, and so on, this is what is the nature of entrepreneurship, okay? So I know that core research is important. I know that we got some amazing research capabilities and unbelievable things, but the entrepreneurial attitude is the following. And I'm going to repeating this another time because that thing is important, saying something can be done differently, which has value for people. And we can just break down why we would have the value, why we could make a business. And we discuss with people to be able to validate the hypothesis, modify what we have until people are ready to pay us some money and we can make a business out of it. Okay? By the way, I'm not looking at the time, so I'm probably either too late or too fast. Now, one of the things that I've discussed with probably every team that I've worked with in the venture lab who have got a number of ideas is about entrepreneur as a career. And I want to spend a little bit of time. This is something actually that Alexander and I have discussed many times. So the first thing that I want to explain is that entrepreneurship is hard. So usually I introduce myself as a proud 3-time failure. So in other words, until I had the fourth company, which I think it was not a failure, I started something, it fell down. I had to open a company on the 1st of January and we couldn't get funding and closed it on the 31st of December and so on and so on and so on. So what I have is actually, in terms of experience, something which is typical. So I want to insist on this because you will have a far easier, and I really mean it, you will have a far easier life by going to McKinsey and BCG. With a number of the guys on the venture lab who have had some work experience, it's much more difficult and it's much harder to be an entrepreneur. And believe me, when I was your age, I had hair on my head, and then something happened. I've lost most of it. And that's because it's difficult. There are a number of guys, don't laugh, that may happen to you someday, okay? So take advantage of that. There's actually a Harvard Business School case on my company, and I remember one of the guys asking, what was great about, what did you were happy with this? What I'm most proud of in my company is that I could pay 50 people every month. So when suddenly you have the responsibility on your shoulders to raise funding, to take all the risk, and in the same time, you've got people that are now depending on the success of your choices and your behavior, it's not simple. And while we are there, the competition is much more intense. You're into a much smaller ship in a big ocean where there are big boats and swear. So it's not easy. If everyone tells you that this is easy and this is simple and you can make a fortune, blah, blah, this is all wrong. It's difficult. It's very hard. Okay. I know that, and I think it's important to realize this. In fact, on the podcast, I have a number of examples of people who explain that they failed. There's actually a Harvard Business School book, which is called Why Startups Fail. It's actually a very positive book because it explains why some startups are failing and what it means to be failing and rebounding. And actually, the week after on the podcast, I interviewed a guy who is a TOOM 2001 alumni. His first company was, quote unquote, textbook of what to do. They work on a great product. They found some great customers. They were able to get a first angel investment. And you know what? They started in 2001. So 2 months or 3 months when they were starting to do a sort of real fundraising, there was 9/11. They couldn't raise any funding. So you got guys, and this is a great example because the guy has really done everything that was exactly textbook entrepreneurship. Yet something happens that you can't control, and his first company failed. 6 months after, he was another company, huge learning, and his company was doing good. So the failure rates are very, very high. And the other thing that I want to explain is these days is that some of the tech giants, you may not know these, but if you are in LinkedIn, Facebook, the tech giants are already starting to say, how can I get these guys? How can I get these guys? And they offer currently offers which are actually pretty crazy. And I would say something like, maybe, I don't know if this is sustainable, but it means that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you're going to have to do something which is more difficult than being in some of these big companies. You're going to have to realize that failing is part of being entrepreneur, and that, sometimes you may have feeling that some of the guys are having not only an easier life, but also a better paycheck at the end of the month. But, okay, there's a but. The first thing that I want to say is that failing is actually something which is much more commonly accepted. So at the age that I have, let me tell you, having to start a company and close this was not something that was something you would put on a t-shirt, okay? Because this is something which was not something that people, look nicely and kindly upon. It's something of the past. I think that one of the great things about the understanding of entrepreneurship today is that doing something, having a problem, failing and restarting is something which is no longer a sort of indelible stigma. So people accept that if you fail gracefully, they're actually quite appreciative. There's always an element about the monetary element. So first, I don't know of any entrepreneur who is doing something for the monetary value. One of the great moments for my startup is that my investor and myself, we actually took 5% of the amount which we made, and we gave it to all the employees of my company. And the best days in my life was when I got married. I had my kids, and I gave the 5% to all these guys. So I didn't do this I didn't do all what I did just for the sake of money's sake. I did this because I wanted to do something that was going to have an impact. And by the way, this is also what I'm doing here today at the Venture Lab and talking to you guys. That's because it's an ability to do something more than getting a paycheck and doing something. It's doing something which is more fun. But when it comes to a number of elements which are monetary, what you got to understand when you are actually starting a startup is that you may get at some stage, some type of salary and so on. But what you are doing is that you're not only building income, you are building wealth. So let me give an example. There's a couple of guys which were in one of the program called Explore. They wanted to develop some AI system to be able to follow the consumption of the state of the battery on some scooters. And once again, just like what I explained, they made an example that maybe this could be a value for the guys running the fleet of scooters and so on. They do all these hypothesis formulation validation. The text looks promising. They can get access to the data, but then by discussing with people, they realize that they have maybe not something where there would be an economic buyer. So they rethink what they can do. And then first they are totally depressed. Once again, I say failure are high, but people rebound. And then they have another idea, and 2 weeks after they give me a call and they say, we have an idea, we've spoken to 20 guys, we think that we can actually do this about EV charging. And they actually talk to an accelerator called Techstars. They show them a little mock-up, the 20 interview, And the guy says, look, this is great. Do you want to join this accelerator? We give you this amount of money. We actually take you in the US for 3 months where you can meet this and this and this. The implied amount of money that they've been receiving from this trusted source is basically, guy says, look, given what you've done, I think your company is already worth 400,000 euro or dollars. So what does this mean? These guys, they may be, because of this amount of money, get something, bit of income. But what they are doing as well is that they're also building this amount of ownership into their company. And as they start evolving, there are a number of guys which are the venture capitalists, the accelerators, says, hold on, this has value. Of course, this is not liquid. It's not something you can trade. You got to wait. But as they are building their company, they are building some income, and they're also starting to build this element, which is going to be the wealth. So in other words, if I come back to some of the offers that the tech guys are actually making, some of the tech guys are going to be giving some of you big amount of money right now, but you will very rarely develop wealth. So it's very different. It's basically the whole difference between an employee and being an owner. And the owner, they know that the wealth, that the amount, the value they're developing, that the wealth that they're building is something which ultimately mean that they will have a different career path than those guys going to big companies. But they are building something else, which in terms of monetary value will make that at the end, we'll see who will have, the best position. Okay. So I don't want to say that, I've heard from a few professors, not Alexander, that because of the big offers that the companies are doing and so on, no one will be entrepreneurs. And that's not the case. Okay. It's a different lifestyle. It's a different sort of business model and monetary value. I've spoken about the ownership, which is this employee versus owner. But there's one thing that I want to explain, which is I've discussed again with a number of the teams about whether you can be in a startup and then move to a big company. So this is the one where I want to say that, it's not obvious. Because when you're into a small company, you're going to have breadth of responsibility. Actually, if you Google my name, I know it's going to sound terrible, but there's a TEDx talk where I speak about this. And I know it feels totally arrogant to say, listen to my TEDx talk. I hope no one is recording this. No, someone is recording. But what I explain is that if you're in a small company, the difference is not, in terms of differences in activities and so on. We all both in large company, small company want to push some software. In a small company, you are going to be ending with a lot of things you need to work on. So when I was running a small company, I had to work about product development, about product marketing, about sales, about finance, about branding, and so on and so on. Of course, there were many people helping me, which were each of them better at their domain. But we collectively looked not as a small part of responsibilities, but at the whole company and all of these things. So if you are a small company guy, an entrepreneur, usually you are happy to be working on what I call wide problems. Okay, you don't want to be asked, can you please develop something which is going to be just a specific module for something which may be shipped after something like 24 months. These are real numbers in large companies, and you just worry about this, we'll worry about the rest. Okay, of course, if you are in Microsoft or Google, which are amazing company, and you develop something and it gets shipped, if it passes all the gates, all the hurdles to be shipped, of course, you have the unbelievable pleasure of seeing many people use this tech. But you are going to be having what I call a lot of depth, but a very reduced amount of width. Okay, unless you are very high, but then you got different attitude. Startup guy, right from the first day, they have to think at a lot of things. And if you tasted once the pleasure of having to work on all of these things, then I would say that coming back into something which is a little narrow is not easy. Okay, and this is why it's a different career, and this is why I want you to be aware of that. Okay. And the other thing that I want to say is that entrepreneurs don't work alone. So the joke in Silicon Valley is that you need three types of people to build a software startup: a nerd, designer, hustler. The nerd is the guy who codes. I like it when, you know, I can see you guys laughing, which is why this is a good joke. So nerd is usually a guy who codes. The designer is the guy who can read the market. Okay, the guy who says, "Oh, don't do this sort of thing," and so on. And the hustler, well, don't need to describe what the guy is doing, but you know, what it means more profoundly is that when I see a number of teams where there are three nerds, and sometimes it happens more than once, teams are making companies, people with complementary capabilities. And this is where the fact of being in university, where you can meet a lot of people, and I know COVID hasn't been helping. It's actually really great to see so many people. When was the last time I was in a room with so many people? This is positive of all the effort that we've done. But more importantly, you are in a place where there are many people with different knowledge, know-how, capabilities. So if you have a number of friends or people where you got the same interest and the same values, and you are a little different and you got complementary type of talent, this is a great recipe to create teams. Okay, I really insist. You know, the good entrepreneurs, they are guys who work in teams. And I know there's always maybe, you know, one guy who is to be doing a number of things, but usually every strong company has been made by guys working in teams. And one of the things that, for instance, we've discussed with Alexander is what he calls, you know, the need to mix deep tech and low tech. I don't know which one is the low tech and which one is the deep tech, by the way, when you say this. But what basically what this means is that, yes, you need people that can really do some in software, some strong technology, but you need people that can also be able to tell you, you know, what are the various football drills, how to be able to better understand some of the different type of way football practices are organized. So you need mix of people. And the biggest issue, by the way, is that maybe not you, but many guys that I talk to, they would have problems selling ice water on the desert. So learning how to go and convince a customer, a prospect, to actually look at the technology, install it, test it, and then being able to get some money if everything is okay. Talking to a VC and say, this is what we believe we are worth, and we want this amount of percentage. These are things also that you know, are important to do. So whenever someone comes and want to discuss about an you know, venture with me, I always say, are you alone, or do you have complementary teams? And no, I don't want three clones. You know, I want people that can really work together. So I've described what's entrepreneurship. I want to discuss something that we both have discussed very often, which is entrepreneurship as a career, because you know, you guys are going to be graduating pretty soon. So I'm not here to teach you stuff, which I'm trying to make you think of career choices. So this is why I think these things are really important. Let me illustrate a number of elements in Tube. So as I told you, I'm really impressed by the amount of resources which Tube has to help entrepreneurs. So the first thing is that you are getting great education here, you know, from Alexander and all his and her peers. I looked at the 90 company that I've been speaking to, and I usually like to basically do a sort of classification. Who's got some interesting technology? And don't ask me what is interesting technology, but I'm sure that if I assume it's interesting, you will also assume it's interesting. And who's got domain knowledge? So how the technology could be applied into something. So the first thing is that only 5% of the team that I've worked with have both. Okay, and one of them is in football. 75%, they have interesting capabilities. So the tech is interesting, but they need to, of course, deepen the domain knowledge. So the positive thing is that 75 plus 5, 80% of the team I've discussed so far, they are great engineers. So the first thing you got to be realizing this is that here you are actually getting first-class education, and I would have once again loved to have hired many of you guys, because it's a great place. I mean, congrats. I may not have been able at your age to be able to have maybe entered now passed the class. This, but I'm totally sure I would have felt. This is a great place. Take 2 minutes to realize this. So it's a great place to be an engineer too. But you need to develop domain knowledge if you want to be, doing a startup and making it successful, and team are important. So there are a number of resources which exist to help entrepreneurs beyond the technical classes. So as I've told you, initially when I arrived, I wanted to make some classes and courses and teach a number of things. And it takes a lot of time to do this. So I started the podcast. The podcast is called Entrepreneur Realities. I have a little less than 20 interviews, and I've either interviewed young entrepreneurs, which are basically a couple of years older than you are. I've interviewed VC who explain how they look at various type of projects, and this is really interesting because these guys are really interesting. And then I've interviewed a number of academics which have been studying entrepreneurship and can help you step back and think about some of these things. So, when you are coming here to Garching, it's called Entrepreneurship. I try to have 30 minutes. There's 1 or 2 where it's been 45. I'm sorry, but it was a great interview. And this is something which is extremely complementary and I think inspiring, but very complementary to some of the teaching that you have. So I would really recommend you listen to this and talk about this. What you also have in TOOM is a huge number of resources to help you if you have a project. I actually even discuss many times with Alexander because I think there are too many of them and it can be confusing. Usually what I said to everyone is that if you want to discuss about a project and even thinking about doing something, come and see me. My time is unlimited for you guys. I really like to do this. But if you want to start a company, they are basically the startup consultant, the Gründungsberater. They can actually help you to get this specific funding which exists in Germany called Exist. And it's a great scheme which exists to be able to help startup, to be able to have a certain amount of money to be able to really focus on your project for 1 year. Not every country has this. So it's really something that is important. And the Gründungsberater, the startup consultant, they know how to help you actually get this sort of funding. It's something which means that you don't realize this, but in Switzerland, in France, other places, you don't have this. So TOOM is a great place to learn about technology, but Germany is not a bad place to be actually an entrepreneur, okay? And then you got a number of programs. You have either programs that can help you to be able to get a number of exposure to a number of elements about how to run a company, identify segments, make some work and so on. You got an accelerator. We got a very close relations with many of the VCs. I've actually, when I arrived, I visited something like 10 of the big deep tech early stage VCs. I've taken them to either Garching or some of the battlements which exist in the city so that they could see what we are doing and meet a number of teams, and everyone is very impressed. And we now have established very strong relation with these guys. So if you're a project, the Gründungsberater can help you get started, get Exist. There are a number of programs which exist to help you find co-founders, although I believe this is something which takes a bit of time. And you can use some of these programs to be able to get technical support, business support, whatever. And this is something which is really very, very strong. So you have a lot of capacity in TOOM to be able to start your startup. Okay. Let me add a couple of elements about some next steps. So there are 2 great books about entrepreneurship, and these are absolutely books. If you go to Silicon Valley, if you go to Harvard or to Stanford, everyone knows this book. The first one is called The Lean Startup, and The Lean Startup really is a description of how you try to do as an entrepreneur to get a sense for how with limited resources you can validate that you got something. And this is this is an extremely smart book. Nearly every team that comes in, I ask if they have read The Lean Startup. And I advise them to do this because it's really something that is of great value to try to structure how you want to be, getting a sense for the way you have a business or not. Another one is called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. And this bell-shaped curve that you see on the cover is something that has been articulated to explain how some new technology gets accepted. And it's called the technology option life cycle. I see a few heads nodding because this is the TALC, T-A-L-C. Everyone knows about the TALC in Silicon Valley. I don't know how to translate it in German. These two books are great books. I really, really, really recommend them. I would even say that they are as important as technical books and so on. They are great to read. Jeffrey Moore now no longer updates his book, but he actually would update his book every couple of years. I would read every year the new book when it comes because there would be better examples. And I've learned tons about this thing. I actually remember because in my company, there were 7 guys reporting to me. I bought 7 times the Lean Startup and I had each of them read the book, and we use this for our business, and it's really something which is good. I want to insist on, again, if you have a number of ideas, don't work alone. Find co-founders which have got the same value but complementary skills. And once again, this university, this is the best place for you to find these. And there's a great podcast which I'm very proud that I've done. It was real fun, and I'm probably repeating myself, but that's the privilege of being in this position. So take advantage of the resources which exist at TUM. It's a great time to be an entrepreneur, and you're in the right places. And if you have any project, either it's, even if you have an idea that you think you want to do something, come and spend time with me. There's good coffee in my office. I'm at the Entrepreneurship Research Institute. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Antoine. We do have time for a few questions.
Am I totally, did I speak far longer than what was 10 minutes? Okay. My family is used to that. Okay. Okay.
So I guess maybe an icebreaker question for you. Where can these folks get information about the offerings at TUM now to first get some orientation? So you have pointed us to some things. Where can they get more information? What are things to look for on the TUM website?
Okay, so the question from Alexander is, where can you guys get information about the resources which are available for entrepreneurs? So I don't know the specific pages, but there are a number of programs about TUM entrepreneurship that you can find. Some are really, a little short, but this is actually quite well done. But the thing that I want to say is, this is my email, antoine.leboyer@tum.de. Write to me. I will speak with, I pledge to you that I would actually discuss and find time to speak with each and every one of you. Okay, so you will find things on the Venture Lab webpage, but my office is a few minutes from here. Come and see me. I'm working with, I've met tons of people. There are people which are PhD where I've said to them, take your time. There are people from bachelor where I said, this is a great idea. You should even actually, given what you've done, you should actually even stop your studies. Alexander, don't listen. I will speak with absolutely everyone. Okay, that's the best I can say.
Check out the it's maybe free first.
And if I can repeat, so Management More, CDTM, and the Venture Lab. And we all work together, by the way. It's one organization. We all discuss together. I've sent a number of teams to many of these organizations and so on. Okay, the first question is very technical, and it says, since SaaS is kind of rolling right now, what are the most suitable languages framework for SaaS application? That's a question for you. The question is basically, the technical question, what are the most suitable languages and framework for SaaS application? Okay, so okay, look at GPC. Okay, so let me choose the question. So one of the question is, how do I choose the domain for deeper knowledge? What is the best way to obtain deeper knowledge about a domain? So they are usually people, when they come and discuss with me, I usually find that there are two types of entrepreneurs. One which have got some understanding and some interest of a knowledge, and some which come and say, you know what, there is climate change, or COVID is very big, so we need to do something. Ultimately, your experience, center of interest, should give you a sense for what is something where there is, once again, as I said, something that can be done differently. So the real entrepreneurs, they don't want necessarily to go into something which looks very big. They have this sort of mindset where they look at everyday life and they say, oh, how come we are, I don't know, doing this like that? It shouldn't be possible. There should be a better way of doing this. And this is, in other words, if you have the sort of attitude of entrepreneur, your everyday life should be looking at how can we do something differently. So you have to do something which is close to what you guys are doing. Actually, the best entrepreneurs that I work with, they are guys which have had several work experience, but their mindset and the way they are actually structured is that they always look at issues. So there's one team that I'm working with. They are guys which are in masters, and they have done a couple of internship on data science. And these guys, they have had a number of issues about project being stalled because of compliance and data anonymization. And I love the way they came and they say to me, we may not have a lot of experience, but we've had this problem twice. So if we have the problem, we actually discuss with a couple of guys, and they also have the problem, we think we know how to solve it. So you see, it's a team that has not been trying to say data science is important, climate change is happening. No, they have something, and these are the sort of guys which, when they see something which is a problem, instead of not seeing the problem, or instead of saying it's impossible, they say, hold on, is there a problem? Can I find a better way of doing this? And are other people having the same problem? And everyone who's come to me who's got this sort of genuineness, they are the people that can be doing something. You have no idea of the unbelievable range of projects that come to my office. The ones that are going to be really working well, these are the guys who like the issues and who've got the right attitude. So the way I would actually really try to answer to this question. The more, you don't need, so stay close to what you know, what's of interest for you, but look for problems. This is the mindset by which you will gain this. And when you've got a problem, you will automatically and naturally, as part of this maturation, to be able to understand if you really have a business, that you will deepen the knowledge and you will get more of this understanding whether you got something or not. I think that.
Is it also possible? Sorry, I will take the question. It's also possible to externalize domain knowledge by composing a team of techies and domain experts.
So Alexander's point is that you can actually, externalize the domain knowledge. Yes, absolutely. This is why team formation is really, really important. Okay, and again, we have this thing called the DPI, where you can actually the multiple disciplinary approach. I don't know what is the acronym, but some guys come and say, look, we believe that we got something. How can we actually get some people to help us? and validate a number of things. And this is actually a great way for people to actually not only externalize, but build better teams which are cross-functional. So this is something that is important. But remember, it's a mindset as well as domain knowledge. Okay, no one was born with domain knowledge, but many entrepreneurs were born with this mindset of saying, "Oh, there's a problem. How can I solve it?" There was a question here. Yes. Okay, so the question that your friend is asking is, what was the object of my company? So I first started in a big company where I was actually, I'm old enough to have been the time when people say, go and work at IBM, it's as good as Microsoft today. And I hope this is the joke that I should basically stop doing because I'm going to be offending so many people. And then after that, I went into smaller companies, and I actually was called to work in a company you haven't heard of called Candle, which was a company doing system management. And at this time, this was the largest privately owned software company. So they had a lot of tools to measure the performance and availability of specific application operating system. And it was a multi-billion company. Then I went into a number of the companies, and then just to cut a long story short, I heard of a small company which was actually not doing really well. And I looked at the technology and I said, hold on, this is exactly what I was missing when I was at this company. Can we do something? I actually acquired the company. I professionalized this, and then I took all what they had from old monitoring of application into monitoring of new applications. So I didn't get domain knowledge, of course, from day one. I use my expertise. And what you have right now is something which is that as many companies are moving into SaaS applications, the way they use to look at the health of applications and make sure that mission critical applications are working fine. When you had data centers, they could look at tons of data which were already available. When you move into the cloud, all this data disappears. So if you want to validate that a website or a SaaS application is effectively working because it's a mission critical application, you need to develop new technology to be able to get the data and interpret the data. And my company was actually developed a lot of new technologies to be able to address some of these capabilities. Now, I had previous domain knowledge. I thought this was interesting. We bought the company when it was, and we restructured this 2008. But as always, you can't predict what's happening. And we didn't knew that the cloud was going to be so important. The fact that we had to rethink what would be our value proposition was something that took place 2 or 3 years after. And this is, in a way, this thinking that, you don't come with domain knowledge a priori, but you have this attitude of regularly working with trying to validate, make hypotheses. And one of the things that I did, which was answering your question about, what was great, is that I created what I call the customer board. We invited in Europe and in the US during one day, the top 10 clients, the guys that were really the power user. And we said to them, we pay you for your flight and your hotel. It's not a marketing event. We want to explain to you what we are going to be developing. We want you to give us feedback. And in a way, this is in a small company doing this sort of lean startup thinking. Can we check this is interesting? Do you like this thing? And this is the ability to do this that was something that was really useful to get new stuff that was valuable. What did I like? I loved working, running company, having wonderful colleagues to work with, being able to actually take it from here to here. I like the breadth of responsibility. It's something that is really, really, really fun. But it's really difficult. And before I could do this, I couldn't even know if it was going to be a success. So this is something that I really enjoy this. So this is, running a company is not easy. Unless you do it, you don't know if you can do it. You never know what are going to be the problems, but doing it is nice and it's good. It was maybe a small company, only 50 people. Of course, it was neither one of the big giant, but that was mine and that was enjoyable. Other questions? Yes. So the question of your colleague is, what are the steps to form a company? So the first thing that you have to do is that you try to identify problem, something that could be why you would have a company. Okay, you don't found a company by doing company, which is, by the way, something that some of your friends and colleagues knock at my door, and they've already started a company, even raised some funding and did a number of things, and then they start thinking about what to do. I've got a couple of great examples of guys which are, very active, and there's nothing wrong with this. But the first thing you do is that you say, hold on, what can I do? What can I do? What can be done differently? And then what I usually recommend is the two classical next step is the following. Don't be alone. Find other people to actually address these, people that you really get along well, because more than, people which have got different type of approaches and competency and background, but people which usually will have the same working style and the same values. And what you should do together is something which is described in this book called The Lean Startup. I said to everyone, okay, don't tell me about the technology. Try to identify all the reasons that could justify that you have a business that could be sustained. So some of the questions could be, of course, technical questions, but also why someone would be interested, why they would be a good model. Can you deliver these? Usually, if the guys think about these, why they would have a business, they come with something like 50 type of hypotheses. And the way you actually go out on validating, and then you look which are the one which are important, where you can get this sort of validation. And this is the proper approach. When you believe that you got something where you both can deliver value and so on, then this is where you should start. Okay, I wouldn't start before. Okay, I wouldn't start before doing this. Like if I take the example of these guys, which I got this idea with a scooter, they thought that they had already worked out something. They work together. They formalize all these hypotheses, and then they come back totally one day half depressed because they suddenly realized by talking to XYZ it didn't work. And then they come back because they had the right mindset and they learn how to approach this. This is really very much the steps. And you got to understand, I would be in a business school that I would actually talk to them more about technology. But I'm in a situation where I really don't have to worry about this. This is why this is the step which I'm asking. Once you have these, if you're at TUM, I recommend to contact the Grundsberater and try to look for exist funding, which is one of the great strengths of the German system to help startup. And really, it speaks for the quality and the importance of how this country is helping entrepreneurs. I would actually really try to be under this situation where during 1 year you have good resources to be able to validate your product. Until then, you don't even need to formalize and to create a company. Okay, you can get this funding without having done through the incorporation of a company. The first day you got the exist funding, you got to think in 12 months, I need to make sure that I have enough validation, product market fit to be able to raise my first level of funding. And it means that from the day, the first day that you are receiving the amount of money, you have to think, what do I need to do to make sure that in 6 months, I have enough of a prototype, enough people being able to say, this is interesting, so that I convince either an early stage VC or an accelerator. But once again, you start by thinking, what can I do? Can I find people to help me work on these? Can I break down these hypotheses and think how I can validate these? Can I, and the hypothesis can be, can I make something different? Can it work better than existing system? But also, would people use this thing? Would they buy and give me some money? All of these things. Once you get some element that you got something, and it's not hardcore certainty because life is not like this, but you get enough. This is where I think you should get started. Great question so far. Any more? Yes, please. So we'll first start with you. Please. So the question is basically, do you need some type of prototype to approach the venture lab? I can only talk about the software AI venture lab. You don't need anything. If you have an idea, if you're interested, if you want to join a team and so on, I'm happy to talk with each and every one of you. Okay. But what I will do usually is that I try to do some sort of first level qualification. So some guy could come with a prototype, and we see if it needs technical support, if they need co-founder, what it means. We try to get a sense for this together. Some guys just want and come and says, look, I want to do something. What can I do? I'm alone. I really think that there are guys which are coming and I discuss with them, and I realize that they could be an unbelievable great match for another team. Please come and visit. There's no prerequisite. Please, everyone's welcome. Everyone's welcome. There's good coffee in my office. I'm Swiss. There's another question. Yes. So the question is, can you speak about the failure rates and what this is to fail gracefully? So I don't have the exact percentage. People speak about Series A type of funding. So normally when you work on funding, you distinguish between two types of VCs, those which are happy to help you on tackling the product risk. So you come and you say, my product is not finished, but I believe we can do this and this and this, and they will help you fund, in a way, the product development funding. And those that are going to come after, who are going to give you money to be able to do the product expansion, these are people that are happy to finance the risk associated with the growth. Usually these are what people call Series A, and they are usually multi-million-dollar by opposition to smaller tickets which come in. The failure rate for Series A is 30%. So you would believe that after all the steps which have been done to do some product development and get some type of market fit, it would be pretty high. You got 30% failure. If you look at the portfolio of a VC, what they usually would tell you is the following. They really try to get a sense for good criteria to invest. And usually they will look at the technology, the team, the market, the competitor, the whatever. And they are really good at doing these things. But they know that out of 10 investment, 8 will tank, 1 will do okay, and 1 will be fabulous. So this is usually the way they work. The VC, in other words, is not like a bank who is going to look very precisely if you can afford a car or a house or something like this. They are going to look at a number of criteria, which are, of course, their own criteria. And even the very best VC, if they have 1 or 2 investment that do well out of 10, 1 is great, 2 is fabulous. So this is usually the sort of failure which they have. In Silicon Valley, by the way, if you have already failed 1 or 2 times, it gives you even more credibility. Now, failing gracefully is the following. I would say there are two criteria. The first one is that you don't linger too long. I've seen people that it's obvious for everyone that something will not happen, and they stay and they stay and they stay and they stay. So I think this is one criteria of failing gracefully. By the way, I usually say that realizing that you're failing is like having a breakup. So think about all your breakups. I'm sorry if you've had, I hope you haven't had too many of them. This is exactly the same thing. From a mental standpoint, you've got to move. The other thing is that for some startup, if you've got suppliers, if you have people you've hired, and suddenly you can't pay them, then this is failing non-gracefully. Okay, and if you're running a company and you have a board, I can tell you that one of the discussions that we always have is how many months of cash do you have? Do you have a path to keep this amount of cash and continue operating? And if you don't have enough cash, when should you actually stop? So I'm helping a number of guys. I'm on board of a few companies. There's one guy that I was talking to, and he's saying that normally, if everything is okay, he should have a sort of double-digit fund raise at this time of the year. If it doesn't happen, then he could be doing X, Y, and Z. And if he cannot do this, then he knows that basically in May, he's got to start reducing the team. Otherwise, everyone will fail. These are not easy things to discuss, but doing this thing with a sort of, cold head so that you don't put your employee in a bad situation, as well as your suppliers. And even I would say, call some of the customers and says, look, we won't be continuing, but this is how you should be doing. This is what is failing gracefully. Yes. Okay, so the question is basically what this is to go into a market where there are a number of established products and you improve the products by comparison to going into something which is greenfield. Okay, so I could argue with you that I don't know of anything which is a greenfield. Okay, in other words, if you are going to be doing something, the likelihood is that you are going to be not doing something totally new, but doing something better. Okay, so part of this work, which I said about the fact that entrepreneur is going to try to break down number of hypotheses, is usually how is this done today? What are the challenges and how can we overcome the challenges? And that's true for an unbelievable amount of things. Once again, before Google, there was Yahoo. You know Yahoo? So you're not that young that I believe you know Yahoo. Yahoo was pure indexing. Okay, it was manual brute force indexing until someone could come and say, hold on, by doing the hyperlink, we can do something which is not only more efficient but can scale. Okay, so I would argue with you that every new business doesn't come out of zero. BioNTech is someone comes and say, we can do vaccines which can be developed much better and much faster using this thing called mRNA. There's always this sort of thing. And every entrepreneur will have to get a sense again of saying, how is this done today? And can we do something better? So I can tell you that out of all the teams that I've worked with, when they come and they say, this is what we want to do, for them to move forward, either they come and say, this is how this is done right now, okay? Or the way they move forward to validate if they have a business, which is the question you ask, is sometimes by saying, hold on, if you say that nowadays, football trainer don't use these things, how do they do? And the guy comes and says, well, he uses pencil and paper. There's always doing something. The other thing that you got to ask yourself is, why is this right now like this? So this is where I recommend, this book, which is called Crossing the Chasm, which is this book in red called by Jeffrey Moore. This is someone who's formalized looking at many companies and many technologies, why certainly some people are going to take technologies and be ready to run with this, okay? And this is something that I would really recommend, because it makes you try to formalize better what makes that suddenly something works, okay? So I would recommend you look at this. But to come to your question, why were people not using battery-powered car before? Well, there were guys using cars before. They was just using the technology in battery. There was every time you got something which exists before. Please. So the question is basically, when I have a product, when do I need to modify the product, the marketing mix so that the product gets accepted? Okay, so the question is, I have a product, how can I find the right audience who's interested in, so that I can grow my revenue? So first, listen to episode number 6 of the podcast. I know, okay, I know that it's a bit of advertising, but this shows you how the question is important. So there are 2 ways of answering the question. The first one is that you're in a big company, you have an advertising agency, you can spend gazillion dollars on Google ads, and this is how it will work, and this is the easy part, and it doesn't concern any of us because we're all entrepreneurs here. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to understand that you have to learn how to be visible. In other words, you have to realize that these days, the time when people are trying to push content and knowledge is something which is gone. What you have to do is that you've got to learn not only to do something new and valuable and interesting, but be visible. And there is a technique which is called inbound marketing that is extremely well suited to software startup. Let's assume you are in a B2B space. I always say to the guys, you create a page LinkedIn. You try to get a sense for why people will be interested in your product and your approach, and you start regularly communicating about what you do, and you try to have a sort of regular social media information about the value, about some new development, about an example of what the guys have been doing. You use the right hashtag, you use the right keyword. You see, and we do this with many of the startups, how often people are starting to be following them on LinkedIn. We usually try for every type of document that they do to have a call to action. The call to action is usually, we do something like this. You want to go more, go into my website. When they're on the website, we offer them something like a white paper. Well, for them to get access to the white paper, they got to give their name, their number, their email, and so on. And always there's a call to action. It's basically, in other words, learning as you develop the product, as you do things which are interesting, to communicate in a way that people can find you. And usually the question that I ask to people, how did you buy your PC? How did you buy your stuff? Well, you didn't go into a shop and ask someone because you made yourself, you wanted yourself to actually learn about these by going into a review, by reading about something. That's true for everything these days, especially with technology. I'm working with a company which has developed amazing technology for finite element mechanics, and it's a very precise domain. So there are 3 PhDs, this great team. They've developed tech, which I think is very impressive. What are they doing right now? They are developing specific case studies, giving new examples, and they have this sort of systematic approach of saying, this is what we've done. Do you have the same problem? This is the value proposition. The guys actually register, they download a white paper. After that, they can call them because they made themselves visible. So learning to be visible these days is very important. And I also want to come back to something which is, need to validate the hypothesis. One of the great things about the age of internet today is that because of the cloud, because of this ability to start being visible on social media, the hurdles and the associated cost to be visible so that you can actually engage with the people and validate your hypothesis, it has never been that easy. And this is why there are so many software startups, because not only are there a lot of new technologies that you can leverage to take to many, many companies, but also the ability to validate the hypothesis, especially into the world of software, as well as be visible to find people ready to engage with you. This has never been that simple. So once again, it's a great question. Episode 6, and come and see me. Yes.
No, I think we need to take one last question from the outside.
Yes. If you guys want to come and talk to me, I'm more than happy. Yes.
What should I do as a first year? Should I still keep studying? Should I already start with something, science studying or something like that?
So the question basically, if I want to start something, do I need to continue studying and so on? It all depends if Alexander is in the room or not. It's damn, I don't know how to answer this one. Can I say I don't know? No, can't say I don't know. I'm going to be more pragmatic. I've said to a few guys which are the bachelor level the following. I really think you guys have got, the energy in the eyes. I'm sure you're going to be doing a lot of things. And my belief is that you are something which could be a little shaky, but you got the right attitude. If I meet someone who's got the energy in the eyes and they are really into something like this, then I'm going to say, well, do like Gates and Zuckerberg. Otherwise, you know what? Continue studying, but try a lot of things and fail very fast. Okay? And please continue failing, continue coming and seeing me as soon as you learn things. I want to make sure that you are continuing to fail and continue. So this is why, and so far, I haven't met anyone that I felt was Gate or Zuckerberg number 2 or number 3. But I've met many guys where I've been saying to them, please fail a lot, fail fast, continue doing this thing, and don't be upset about this thing. Okay. So I think that right now, unless you are into a unique situation which exists, I have a friend where I put some personal, I've advised him. He's in Würzburg, and he actually had an idea, and he actually stopped his bachelor studies, and he just finished. His company is worth 25 million right now. But this is the only one guy that I know. All the others, I've told them, you are in a good university. You got a lot of things you need to be learning. Make friends, get people to work with, make mistakes, learn fast, fail a lot, but fail very fast and continue having the same drive and approach. So this is what I would say. I don't know if this answers your question, but if I knew, I wouldn't be here, Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much, Antoine. Stick around for a couple of minutes if you have more questions. Let me maybe say at the end 2 more things. Why did I ask Antoine to come here? Because I want you to understand that building your company is a very natural choice for whatever you want to plan in the future, right? And I want you to keep that in your mind. If you think about your profession, maybe startup could be. The second thing that I'd like to realize to observe is we are training you to be engineers, and that means we are training you to solve problems in a specific way. You may have realized that Antoine is thinking in a totally different way. So he's also an engineer, of course. But when you build a company, you need to take up a different mindset. You need to think in different terms. And that is not just including thinking about a specific domain or anything, but it's also about thinking, how do you set up your company? How is your market big? Do I really want to solve a relevant problem and so on? And that's totally different things that you need to consider. And please do keep that in mind when you pursue. Thanks very much, Antoine. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you for having me.